Hi. Before we get into this conversation, I want to let you know about something I've been working on for a while and which is now available for free on my website. It's a piece called Myth for Modern Men, A Letter to My Son. Again, you can download this for free on my website, explorerpoet.com. I wrote this letter to provide a guide which my son can reference during his own individuation quest, kind of like a map for growing up, maturing, and finding his way in this chaotic world. Today, perhaps more than ever, the world needs men who are balanced, aware, emotionally intelligent, and driven to become whole individuals who can contribute to families, communities, and society in a healthy way. Rather than encourage the process of self-discovery, modern institutions often force men into compliance or predetermined roles. Society seldom encourages young men to explore their values nor think critically, and they don't teach necessary truths about the self, myth, psychology, emotions, fulfillment, education, money, careers, spirituality, relationships, or sex. In Myth for Modern Men, I tackled these topics and many more in a manner that I hope is clear and digestible. Again, you can download Myth for Modern Men for free by visiting my website, explorerpoet.com. Okay, thanks, and please enjoy this conversation. Okay, hi Theo. Welcome to the Explorer Poet podcast.
Hey Josh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I want to throw out is just, again, how I came across kind of what you're doing. And you've got a social media presence, at least on Twitter, which is where I usually, or I guess it's called X now. And I usually go there to find people that are interesting. And when I click through and saw some of your background and some of the things you're doing, it just really stood out to me that I think we've got a slightly similar path. And then we've kind of arrived at some things that are interesting to both of us. So just to get kicked off, I did want to give you a chance to kind of talk about your story, where you started as far as a professional situation, and then what brought you to eventually to be doing the work that you're doing. And maybe we can dive into that a little bit too.
Yeah, sure. And so to go back a few years, more than a few years, I got a degree in economics and then got a job in the world of finance. And it was a good job. And I was glad that I was making decent money. It wasn't really taxing. I was surrounded by good peers. So that kind of safety then gave me the space to question what it is that I want out of life. And I was also lucky to be in a situation where there were no responsibilities or debts that I had to take care of. And all that space, and also then being quickly disillusioned with the corporate world, it definitely did not seem like something that I would want to do for the next 40 years. It then gave me a nudge to start exploring, checking out what's out there, what I could potentially do. And around the same time, I had my first experience with LSD, which was a catalyst for questioning even more deeply. And then considering that what I had was so comfortable and safe and good, and that if I go out there and explore and experiment, and even if things don't work out, I could somehow find my way back to this thing. That felt like a given. And so I quit my job after I had managed to gather a decent amount of savings. And then my first priority was to find a skill where I can still get paid so that I can pay my bills, and I don't have to be tied to a location or an employer. And the skill that felt attractive, that resonated with me, was marketing, specifically direct response marketing, which is about basically how you can persuade potential customers to instantly buy what you're selling by understanding what their pains and motivations are and what makes them tick. So this then led me to explore a lot of psychology stuff, what makes us tick, why we do, what we fear, what we deeply crave. And while exploring this, I then started getting curious about my own mind. I was also desperately trying to resolve some of my emotional hangups. And how I thought about it was, oh, if I'm so smart, if I can understand people's minds or what makes them tick, I should also be able to do that for myself and get the things that I want. And so that initial line of inquiry and then suffering, which is a great gateway drug, led me to spirituality in a lot of different flavors. I also have been someone who has grown up on the internet. Basically, I have grown up making friends on the internet, exploring on the internet. And I was spending a lot of time on Twitter. And I fortunately found myself in a corner of Twitter where a lot of kind people are nerding out on self exploration. And this is how I stumbled onto a lot of interesting self exploration modalities, healing modalities, and ways of seeing. One of them was IFS, which I consider another gateway drug into the world of healing and self exploration. And naturally, a lot of these self exploration modalities are also very synergistic with psychedelics. Even though I was struggling with a bunch of things, I also felt like a kid in a candy store who got to explore so many different things in a fun way. So yeah, I pretty much got obsessed with this thing, refining my understanding over time, meeting a lot of people, having a lot of conversations about these ideas, and learning from other people's learnings on their journey and sharing my learnings. And I was also then going around talking about these things with anyone and everyone around me. And so a friend approached me to guide an IFS session for her. And that's how I started helping people out with their self exploration journey. And then I started doing with more friends. And then one day I sent out a tweet on Twitter saying, hey, if anyone would like to try out an IFS session with me, feel free to reach out. A few people reached out, had interesting experiences, and tweeted about their experiences. So more people reached out, and that happening on and on again. On this was back in 22 when I sent out that tweet, early 22, and I ended up doing more than 500 of these sessions, like more than 1,000 hours. I was again lucky to be embedded in a community which was very encouraging and supportive of me doing this. And along the way, I realized that this was my calling. So I leaned into it and met so many people from all parts of world, all walks of life, and just continuing to enjoy the journey, showing up, learning, and discovering how much richness and depth there is in our lives. And yeah, having a lot of fun just exploring that. I am grateful that I get to do this for a living. So yes, that's my story.
Okay, awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And there's a lot there to go back and try to cover. I don't want to, there's a part of me, because I have a similar background to you, where I went into the accounting world, and then I actually went back and did an MBA, Master's of Business. And so then I bounced around in the corporate world a little bit, but, and so there's a temptation to go back into that. But I think that we could sum it up pretty simply, where we could say that whole world is, it's geared towards a certain ideology, which is money, security, comfort, that kind of thing. And so I think just to say that something about that wasn't fulfilling for both of us. It wasn't enough. And so we moved on. But then it does make me wonder, there's a reason that I went into it, and that was because the culture that I come from, not that there was like a real need to pursue money, but more for me, it was more about having enough. Where I come from, we didn't always have enough, and just wanting some security. But I'm curious, from your background, given maybe family culture, societal culture, even religious culture, was there that transition from that life of security and comfort into a life where you're kind of an explorer? Was there a lot of pushback against that? Was that something you had to struggle with, or is that just something that you overcame on a personal level and just move forward?
I think I also feel blessed in that area. I am surrounded by people, very much including my parents, my family, who are generally quite trusting of what I am choosing to do for my career. Of course, they have questions, they are curious, but yeah, at no point there was any pushback. And if anything, there was encouragement from the people around me, which made it all very easy for me. It was still it's like from the moment I decided to quit my job, it still took me another year to actually quit my job because I did want a financial cushion to fall back on. And even after quitting my job, it took me almost another year to get used to working without an external structure, an external authority pushing me to do things or being answerable to someone else. So there were those struggles, but yeah, it was mostly smooth sailing for me in that.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Just to become somebody who, I mean, speaking from personal experience, like to become somebody who can manage themselves, keep themselves on task, it's like a figuring out process. Living without that structure and obviously living without the benefits, the financial benefits of that structure, like it takes some effort. Going back to, you said that you had this LSD experience. I guess I'm just curious about the experience. It seems like there was something there that you discovered right away, or you saw something that you hadn't maybe expected. What can you share about that experience, and how did it kind of change the way that maybe your outlook on life or the world, yourself?
For me, I did LSD at the end of 2017. And if you were to ask the 2016 me if I would do something like that, that 2016 me would be very surprised that I would choose to do a drug. But I don't know. I think, yeah, my curiosity just got me very interested in that experience. And then at a very low dose to start with. But what instantly happened was it blew open the possibility landscape, or like, how do I call it? Like, it shows you how much is possible, how much beauty and richness there can be in your life, and that the world, the life you were experiencing was in such a narrow set. And when you realize that it's possible to have aliveness like that, to have a feeling of deep gratitude and awe and, yeah, connection like that, it then naturally makes you wonder and question, okay, what do I need to do to have that in my day-to-day life? So beyond like any insights I might have had in that trip, which I had many beyond any big profound revelations, it was just this simple thing that the possibility of so much more existentially. And it then acted as a gateway into spirituality and a lot of adjacent things, and then pushed me down a lot of different rabbit holes. And in some way, I can trace a lot of the origin of a lot of my explorations back to that one trip.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that you talk about seeing or feeling or becoming aware of there being more opportunity or more possibility. I've had a couple of experiences myself with psychedelics, and the way I describe it is that when you're in your waking life, a sober waking life, it seems as almost as if there are these unseen or unspoken rules or boundaries or some kind of thing that's almost like this image or this structure that you're supposed to exist in. And then when you are in a state of, similar to a state of deep meditation, maybe spending enough time in nature, where these boundaries kind of come down and you feel just much more like, oh, everything's kind of fluid. You just start to see things that you wouldn't see before. I often think about Carl Jung. He had these experiences that he talks about in the Red Book, where he was in kind of deep in his unconscious, interacting, and he's having this conversation with what is essentially an archetype that he's encountered in his unconscious. And the archetype asks him, what is it like to be here? Something to this effect. And he says that he knows he can't stay here. He knows that he doesn't actually belong down here all the time, but that it feels more real than when he's up there, meaning when he's in a conscious state. And to me, that's what psychedelics was. It was like being in this place that, oh, finally everything feels real. Everything is like, isn't contained by ideas or structures. Like you just get to experience things as they are. And in a way, it was very relieving. I mean, in some cases, it could be almost terrifying, but at the same time, very relieving. And it just feels so real and so raw, so present. And I completely understand that desire you have to figure out how to experience that more often in your day-to-day life as something that you don't have to leave behind.
Yeah, that feels very relatable.
So you threw out a couple of ideas, and I see these same things come up on your website. But one of the things you talk about is your emotional hangups. I think I have ideas of what that might mean, but I'm curious if you can just elaborate a little bit on that. What do you mean by emotional hangups? And if you discover them, then what is the process that you've gone through of either solving them or just managing them?
Mm-hmm. I feel like we all have emotional hangups of different flavors, patterns of thinking or acting or feeling, which create suffering, create contraction, create tension in our life. It makes us feel scared and defensive or depressed or numb. And there's just, so many flavors of these. But a common thread that runs through all our emotional hangups is this feeling of disconnection from ourselves, from people around us, from our work, from reality. And then there are also hangups that don't want us to look at this disconnection because it's uncomfortable to sit with that disconnection, to sit with the different flavors of disconnection, sit with this uncomfortable feelings of uncertainty and loss and grief. And so when I started my journey, for me, the turning point was discovering IFS or parts work in general. The idea that all the different ways in which we suffer are just different ways in which we are trying to protect ourselves from pain. And even in the different ways in which we act in unwholesome ways towards ourselves, towards others, are again just ways of protecting ourselves from pain. And that in some sense, no part of us has any ill intentions, or no part of us is bad anyway. Even the parts of us that makes us addicted or anxious or depressed or self-critical, these are all just trying to get our needs met in some ways or protect us in some ways. And so there is now a possibility to drop the fight that we have with ourselves. So one, there's the various inner conflicts that we already live with. And then on top of that, we are then trying to fight against those inner conflicts in an attempt to solve them, but unintentionally just creating more conflicts. But yeah, this lens that nothing is wrong with you, no part of you is bad or broken, showed me a way where you can just drop the fight and be curious about your inner experience, where you can approach yourself with compassion and try to explore why it is that you do or feel or act in ways that you do. Luckily, we have had so many people out there who have done so much interesting work around these ideas and left us with so many tools and ways of seeing and modalities that gives us an opportunity to go deeper, even in a do-it-yourself way a lot of times. And then, it's quite empowering to be able to explore some of your hangups, see how it is serving you, see how you can connect with that part of you that's creating that hangup, and then go to the root of what gave birth to it, and then find ways to unburden all of it. But tragically, mainstream mental health is quite disconnected from these powerful tools. And so, in that sense, the internet was again a blessing for me to discover all of this. And I digressed from your question, but yes.
No, that's okay. I'm just sitting here listening because I think it's interesting. You cover a lot of important topics, from the mental health industry to this idea of not having, there are no bad parts of us. And that's something that I think a lot of people would benefit from hearing. Maybe from like a Western psychology perspective, you could call these emotional hangups as complexes or defensive mechanisms. You could call them trauma that's the means by which we survive the things that gave us our trauma.
Yeah.
So to connect that to this idea of not having any bad parts, we live in what's been termed the axial age, basically started a couple thousand years ago, around the same time that the Buddha and Jesus developed their methodologies. And in reality, they were responses to this axial age, which is like this emergence of these large nation states, these empires, where we've evolved culturally so much faster than we've evolved biologically. And so we have this world where we're not actually adapted to it. We're not meant to fit in here. And so in order for us to survive, it's starting out from a very young age, it's almost as if we have to develop these emotional hangups so that we can cope and we can survive in this environment. One thing that's been very beneficial for me, and it sounds like similar to what you're saying, is you get to a point where you have to look at those emotional hangups and not be upset with them, not treat them as if they're a problem, but in a way almost feel gratitude for them, and to say like, oh, you got me here. You doing this thing got me to this point, rather than trying to in some way aggressively rid yourself of them or just be unhappy that you're still experiencing them. You can have that gratitude and then almost in a gentle way allow them to release that effort and say, you've gotten me to this point, but I don't think that you need to keep putting in this effort going forward. So thank you, but you're now relieved of your burden. And I really wanted to dive into IFS with you, internal family systems. It's actually not something that I'm really familiar with, but just recently I've been hearing about it more. And then also in preparation for this conversation, I listened to a podcast with a gentleman who was describing it. And in a weird way, I think that for the last few years, I've been doing it for myself without even knowing it, because I've had several experiences where, and for me, the chemical that made it easier for me was just cannabis, THC. And just being in moments where I had THC in my system, and in a similar way to the way we were talking about psychedelics, those boundaries come down. A lot of those fears can dissipate, and you can just deal with things directly without so much defensiveness. For me personally, it's like I have this experience where I call it the Council of Joshes, where there's a bunch of different, members, and they're all good at different things. And some of them in my history, my individual history, some of them seem to be appreciated more than others. But I had several experiences where I just started a conversation amongst them. And the first couple times it was, there was a part of me that felt like I was going crazy, but at the same time, I just enjoyed it so much. And I was so grateful that there were all these different, it was almost as if there was communication finally happening. And so it just felt like, wow, this is so great. I put myself through some rituals alone by myself in the woods that made it easier. And then other times just sitting at home with my eyes closed and literally talking to the different parts of myself and saying, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for what you've done. Even hosting it almost like it's a corporate meeting where we go around the table and we say, hey, good job this time. Like everybody give them a hand, applause. But then the one that really stood out to me was I went into the woods one time by myself, and I don't usually talk about this because it was so private, but I had one of these situations or one of these kind of conversations, and there was a part of myself that I could probably only describe it as like a pit in my stomach. At some point, I eventually realized I needed to talk to this part of myself, and so I turned to it. I didn't know what to say. And so the only question that came out was like, what do you want? What are you trying to achieve? And that simple question just relieved the entire experience all at once, because it was as if the whole point was just to get my attention. And this is like my own personal experience, I guess, with this type of self-exploration. But I want to give you the chance to kind of describe more in detail what the idea of IFS is, internal family systems, and I guess what's the framework for thinking about it, and then once you actually want to engage with this, what is the process there?
That's such a beautiful experience you described, and even though it might when we're doing it for the first time or when we're doing it for ourselves, it might seem unnatural in some ways, but it's also so natural in so many ways. I feel so because we are fundamentally relational creatures. We experience life through relationships. So much of our suffering is relational in nature. Even how we talk to ourselves, how our relationship with ourselves, like so much of it is modeled by what we absorb from other relationships in our life. So I feel it's only natural that when we explore our mind through this relational lens, it ends up being a very valuable way of seeing that gives us access to ourselves, like helps us connect to ourselves in ways which we haven't been able to through other means. So yeah, at the core of IFS, which is just one way of how you can relate to your parts, it's one school of thought, but I feel it's a very useful framework. And so yeah, at the core of IFS is this idea of the multiplicity of the mind, that we are not a single cohesive self, but more like a dynamic amalgam of many parts. And this also reflects in our day-to-day language. We talk about how one part of me wants this, but another part wants this. We talk about inner conflicts. So we get this intuitively. What IFS does is it gives a structure to it, or like reflects certain patterns, where one being that the parts of you that make you defensive or anxious or depressed or addicted or disconnected in any way from yourself and from others are just trying to protect you or get your needs met in some way. So IFS calls them protectors. And then IFS has a category of parts called exiles, which represent the suppressed emotional pain that you have accumulated over the course of your life. The protectors are just trying to protect you from this pain, or protecting, maybe one way to say it, like see it would be protecting the wounded part from getting even more wounded, protecting the vulnerable parts of you. And then IFS also hypothesizes that all of us have this energy that which is calm and compassionate and curious and courageous. And if we can inhabit that energy and relate to our parts from a place of openness and wanting to understand them, they open up to us. They let their guards down and tell us what they want for us, what they are scared about, how they feel about playing that role for us. This is such a experiential thing. Rather than seeing it as an idea or concept to analyze your mind, it's more of a way of engaging with yourself. You can actually dialogue with these parts like you did in the experiences you described. You can ask them questions, you can get answers which are often so insightful or revelatory. This just leads you to more connection with yourself. And when you can build trust with these parts, like how you would build trust with any other person or a friend, when you can create safety for these parts, like how you would create safety for a loved one, they let their guards down and they let go of their defensiveness and allow you to get in touch with the emotional pain that's underneath that defensiveness, that tension. And this gives you an opportunity to feel through all of that unfelt, unprocessed pain, to help the part that's perhaps carrying the burdens like, yeah, painful feelings of loneliness, of helplessness, of feeling worthless or lost or powerless. Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways in which you can process these feelings or move through these feelings. There's so much room for creativity there. Imagination is such a powerful tool, and like by imagining these parts and interacting with them and feeling what they're feeling, empathizing with them, having compassion with them. Yeah, I say them, but it's just you, right? It's just, yeah, different aspects of your being. And so, yeah, you are having compassion for yourself, curiosity for yourself, which all of us, like the world is lacking so dearly in so many ways. And when you're able to create a space for yourself like that, it just allows you to move through so much, to let go of so much, to move towards a state of being which is much more open and alive and relaxed and connected. So IFS is one, like I said, one school of thought. But there's no rules for how you can interact with your parts. Like you set up a boardroom meeting with them because perhaps that felt resonant for you in that moment, and you brought your own uniqueness to that interaction. I feel similarly, you can be very creative in how you interact with your parts, how you do exploration with them, how you do inquiry with them. You can bring in ideas from other healing modalities, other spiritual traditions, other techniques, maybe other areas of your life. Maybe, for example, if you are really good at organizing people and getting their attention and motivating them, something like that, or whatever comes naturally to you, uniquely to you, you can bring that same energy to the parts of you that are lacking that energy, the parts of you that need that kind of energy. That's me rambling on about parts exploration or IFS.
The way you talk about imagination, for me, it ended up being like a boardroom. It's not like it needed to be a boardroom, but in that moment, that's just where my imagination took me, because you could just picture it as like some people around a table, and there's goals that we need to talk about, and it's good to talk about our past achievements or our past efforts, and then to kind of regroup and say, okay, where are we going in the future? And in a way, it's like being a kid where you just get to imagine that you get to play all these different characters. Once you get into it, you don't even have to make up the characters. They kind of just appear.
Yeah.
You just pull them from the experiences of your life, the things that you've had to focus on, the things that you've had to accomplish, and how you've gotten to that point. So I think there's just something about the imagination of it, like the play of it, and there's this idea in both the religious context, but also in the healing world, where you get to a point where you become like a little child again, and you just get to, the way that a healthy child would experience the world is just the way that you're talking, the words that you're using, curiosity, openness, questioning. You don't put up defenses because you don't have to be afraid of knowing things, because you just want to know. And there's just something really magical about that. On your website, you talk about resistance, and you talk about loving the resistance. And then also you say resistance is where the gold is. And again, it makes me think of Carl Jung, your greatest fear is the path to your greatest discovery, your greatest healing. So just talk to me a little bit about resistance. What kind of resistance comes up? And then when you feel resistance, what's the best way for managing it?
So this idea of loving the resistance is the core of my approach when I'm guiding an exploration for someone else. So how I see resistance is that when you're approaching the places of your mind that are scary or painful or uncomfortable, and you're approaching those places because that's where your gifts are. Or this other quote that came to mind when you talked about that quote was, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. But now the thing is that we do what we do, we act in ways that are defensive or unwholesome for us, or we create our suffering because there's something painful underneath that. Like a lot of our defensive mechanisms are load bearing in some ways. And so when we try to go in and connect with ourselves, there will be pushback from some parts of you that don't want you to enter some areas of your mind. And sometimes this resistance is explicit. Maybe there's a doubting voice that makes you doubt the process, or that makes you doubt your capabilities to handle that kind of intensity. Or there can be just, feelings of anxiety when you are trying to do that. Or maybe some part can get angry at you for trying to shake things up. But a lot of times, these resistances can also be very subtle in nature. Maybe some part of you takes up the responsibility to distract you, to protect you from intensity, or make you restless, or make you blank. Or there can be so many subtle ways in which we disconnect from ourselves. So the first thing is to develop sensitivity to ways in which we are disconnecting with ourselves, and then bring curiosity to that. There's some part of you that wants to protect you from pain, that wants to protect you from uncertainty or instability. The idea is that if you can be curious about that pattern, that part, if you can approach that from a place of wanting to understand the part, from a place of wanting to bring more ease for the part also opens up to you and lets you know what it is trying to ensure for you, or what it is concerned about. And then the idea is that every emotion, every feeling that comes up for me contains some important information, some important signal or wisdom that needs to be integrated. You can't just bypass these emotions. I mean, you obviously can, but you wouldn't want to be able to integrate the knowledge or wisdom that's contained in that resistance. And so when you connect with that part, when you listen to where that part is coming from, one, it gives you a much better picture of your mind, what it is that you need, what it is that you need to be careful about, what it is that you can do to ensure safety for yourself, for other parts of you, what you can do to bring ease. And then when the parts feel listened to, they let down their guards, they feel heard, they feel reassured, and then they're more than happy to let go of their burdensome defensive role and let you connect with yourself so that you can bring more ease for all parts of you. Yeah, because a lot of times we can be blended with other parts of us. To give you a quick example, let's say there's a part of you that takes this unwholesome approach to self-exploration where there's this impulse to just move fast and break things and just feel all the pain so that I can be healed as fast as possible and so that I don't have to struggle with all these things. And when you take this approach of pushing through and trying to fix yourself, you can end up hurting yourself. You can end up creating even more tension in the system. That resistance can be an indicator that in some way you are trying to apply force. There's a very beautiful idea that I picked up from somewhere, which is that whenever there's any resistance in the system, you can see it as a Newtonian equal and opposite thing. It indicates the presence of a force. Whenever you encounter resistance, this is an opportunity for you to become sensitive and try to find out, okay, where is it that I'm trying to force things, that I'm trying to try hard or effort or fix or solve, rather than just having this open, curious, receptive stance towards yourself so that you can actually connect deeply in a way that leads to that ease and joy that you want in your life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the way you talk about resistance coming in a lot of flavors, there's just so many ways to avoid our feelings or our emotions. Denial and doubt and just telling ourselves stories that go against it. The way that I think about a lot of this is I'm really into stories, myth, fairy tales, because I see them as these outward manifestations of what's going on inside of us. I usually don't recommend Disney. I actually think that Disney has a lot of challenges, but they have this one story called Raya and the Last Dragon. It is the perfect example of, I think, what we're talking about, where there's this kingdom and there's all these different parts of the kingdom. And the biggest challenge that they face is that they no longer trust each other. Mm. And so there's this story of how these individuals from each part of the kingdom, they learn to work together towards this common goal. And by doing that, they eventually bring the whole kingdom back together. And the big word there, and this is what pops into my head when I'm listening to you talk about these different parts and communicating with them and learning to ask them questions and see what they, give them a chance to be heard and understand what it is they have to communicate. It's as if the big opportunity here is to build trust within yourself. And once you have this trust is, in the business world, they talk about trust as this great catalyst, because once you trust somebody, you can just move so fast with them. And it feels like the same thing happens within us. Once we can learn to trust the different parts of ourselves, they can all work together in a much more efficient manner, in a way of speaking, because when you have that emotion pop up, or you have this instinct effect, like this instinct comes to you, or some kind of thought, it's like you don't have to question it all, because you can just trust it and move forward in like a less scared way, in a less resistant way. And then the integration part as well, just once everything can be trusted, and you feel that inside of yourself, you start to integrate these different aspects of yourself. They no longer feel separate. You no longer feel this distance between, or this disconnection between yourself, and that integration becomes so important. I've said this a lot lately in the conversations I've been having on my podcast, but I feel like we have all these different ideas in the world, and we call them healing, we call them growth, we call them maturation, integration, individuation, but it's all the same thing. It's like they're synonymous for each other. They all become this same thing. And it's like these processes that you're talking about, I think it's how we experience those journeys. I want to ask you, I want to transition into the use of psychedelics. And we talked a little bit about it earlier, kind of our own personal experiences and what it's like for us. But from the perspective of this type of healing, integration, what is the benefit of psychedelics? And when you do your sessions with people, what type of psychedelics do you find to be the most beneficial in this type of work?
So there's only three broad class of drugs that I have experience with. One is classic psychedelics, which is like LSD or psilocybin. Although LSD remains my favorite drug for what it has enabled for me and the kind of experiences that I have had with it, I don't feel very comfortable recommending LSD to people because it can be scary and destabilizing experience. Things can go wrong in unanticipated ways. Classic psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. They can amplify fear in your system, leading to paranoia or leading to ways of thinking and feeling that are not wholesome. Although I do believe that if used in an intentional and careful way, there is tremendous value in these substances. They are also such great enhancers of imagination and creativity. I do feel there's a lot of value there. But yeah, I feel that for this kind of work where you're trying to interact with parts of you, where you're trying to go deeper and access painful areas of your mind so that you can let go of the burdens you are carrying. In my experience, MDMA has been the most valuable substance for something like this. I also feel comfortable recommending it to other people with certain disclaimers, because what MDMA does is it creates emotional safety in your system. It creates this feeling of self-love or self-acceptance by temporarily turning up the volume on serotonin. I'm not sure about the exact mechanism, but talking about qualitatively, experientially, what happens is, yeah, you feel much more at home within yourself, within your body. Again, like not everyone might have this exact experience, but that's the general experience. And when you have that kind of emotional safety available, parts of you can feel very comfortable in letting their guards down and opening up to you, and yeah, releasing the pain that you have been carrying for so long into this love that's available in that space. One thing that we haven't touched upon in all these discussions when we're talking about parts work and IFS and is how much of these experiences are and can and should be embodied. Like it's not something that you're just doing in your head. You want to be able to actually connect with these parts in a felt way in your body. If there's feelings of anxiety or feelings of helplessness or pain or what, you actually want to fully feel them in your body to be able to process them and let go of them because of the emotional safety that's created in the system. MDMA also helps you feel more connected with yourself in your body. A feeling that people often describe and that feels resonant for me is like it feels like being at home within yourself. I don't have a lot of experience guiding MDMA sessions for people. I have done it a few times and I have done a lot of MDMA sessions in a do-it-yourself way for myself and helped people around me do it. So that's I speak from that limited set of experience. And of course, there's this like risks associated with anything like this. MDMA can be neurotoxic in some ways. You can, if you use it in ways that is not intentional and careful, you don't take care of your body during it, and if you overuse the substance and all those things. But yeah, having said that, I think MDMA is a great symbol of hope for our civilization, for what it enables. And another drug that you touched upon earlier is cannabis, which also I believe leads to this feeling of more connection in your body, which is why to differentiate between cannabis and MDMA, for a lot of people, cannabis can be quite scary. It can lead to very scary experiences because it can lead you to this deeper connection with yourself, but without that layer of emotional safety, without that safety net of love. So cannabis can throw you into the deeper ends of intensity. And again, like classic psychedelics, that can be such a valuable experience. And even the bad trips often end up being valuable in retrospect when you make sense of it and integrate it and process it. But yeah, I feel there's also a lot of potential in working with cannabis to connect more deeply with yourself, use the enhanced creativity and imagination that cannabis sometimes enable to explore your unconscious in interesting ways.
I appreciate the way you touched on all of them because they definitely all have a different effect. And I also think it's good the way that you throw out that disclaimer. It's interesting to think about LSD as you called it a non-specific amplifier. Mm-hmm. And I've had experiences with LSD that are similar to what you're talking about, where amplified some dark stuff, some scary stuff. And I didn't have the right set and setting for experiencing that. And it ended up being a type of anxiety in my body that I had to deal with for a good year afterwards, where I had to process it in my waking life.
Sorry to interrupt you, but would you say like that journey of having to process it for a year ended up being quite valuable in retrospect?
Yeah, I would say, because people like to use the word bad trip. Uh-huh. And the trip was pretty terrible to experience. But then eventually being able to solve or heal from that experience, it required me to do a lot of things, one of which was be more sober. And the other one is to spend more time actively feeling my body, sitting with it through forms of meditation. And then what I think is interesting about all of these chemicals, and I do want to touch on MDMA as well, but these chemicals, particularly the ones that can give you this experience of anxiety, like I've experienced a lot of anxiety on cannabis as well, is that they do open you up to new things, new ideas. I would say they even open you up to truths that you can't see in your day-to-day life. But then what I found is in just the way that you pointed that out, that I had this bad experience, but then dealing with it or managing it, learning to integrate it in a way and actually finally process it. It's something that you do in your day-to-day life. I think that there's like this idea around psychedelics that you get to experience something spiritual. And the challenge that I have with that is that if you're using psychedelics as this gateway to spiritual experiences, and then that's enough for you, but you're not coming back into your day-to-day life and integrating the things that you learn into the way that you manage your day, the way that you interact with other people, the way that you experience your body, it just seems like a cheap thrill or something that you're doing similar to like riding a roller coaster just for the fun of it. But when you can look at them as like little trips to another place, another realm where you can learn things, and you've got to bring them back and integrate them into your life, then you start to see the value of it in your day-to-day life. MDMA is something, it's the thing that I've experienced the most recently. And for somebody like me who, how do I describe it? It's like wondering throughout your life, what does love feel like? Because it hasn't been readily available from many sources in my life to experience conversation on MDMA, or to experience just spending time with friends in a setting that's very peaceful and calm, and we get to dialogue, have a conversation in a way that you get to not only feel in your body this difference, but also have people express how much they care about you. There's just something about MDMA that I felt like, oh, this is what I've always hoped all these other chemicals would do for me. The difference, for example, between you may have a couple of drinks, some alcohol, and you can feel better in a certain way. You can feel a little more loose. You can have a little bit more fun. But deep down, that's not really what you actually want out of it. What you want out of it is to feel good. And I would say that MDMA gave me that sensation, and in a way that I didn't feel like I needed it all the time. In a way where like I did it, and then afterwards for this long stretch of time, I just felt like, wow, like life is better.
Yeah.
And because I finally felt, I felt that experience of love or connection or whatever it was. And so, yeah, in my inner circle, we talk about it. We call it, our pseudonym for it is that love powder. And that's how we think about it. We're up on the hour. It actually went by really fast. When I get into talking with people that are interesting and have been on their own journeys, like just hearing you explain all this stuff, the time just goes by so fast. So I want to be respectful of your time, but before we jump off, is there anything else that you'd want to share about your practice, your approach, anything that you'd want to say in regards to the entire, like the topic that we've covered, and how you would want at least to package it up so that the listener can hear it in your own summary?
Yeah, thank you for that. So when I started guiding these sessions, which was about 2 years ago, I started guiding, very algorithmic IFS sessions, like step by step. Okay, now we do this, now we do this. And over time, like I expressed earlier, when you realize that there's no rules for how you can connect with yourself, with your parts, I started weaving in these different ideas and ways of seeing from other, even more valuable schools of thought and traditions. And so, along the way, it has become a very free flowy, nebulous style where sometimes even I don't know what I'm going to say next when I'm exploring with someone. And these days, the term I use to refer to these explorations is somatic imaginal explorations, where somatic because at the core of the exploration is connecting with your body, with sensations, with areas of your body or tensions in your body where you have disconnected with yourself, and seeing that as trailheads to lead you to deeper connection with yourself. And then, the imaginal being leveraging the power of imagination to bring to life your unconscious using imagery and archetypes and visuals in general. And but at the core of it remains this idea of parts, or seeing different energies within yourself, seeing yourself as a confluence of many different energies, and then teasing them apart and moving towards more wholeness, more connection with yourself and people around you. And for me, the more I explore in my own journey, the more I discover new things, new ways of seeing, new ways of connecting even more deeply with myself, the more I am able to bring that to my clients. And I feel that I can only help people connect with themselves as deeply as I have connected with myself. So for me, this is an infinite game and ever evolving journey where I get to the furthest reaches of my mind and explore and come back with things that I can then share with other people, which I hope that in direct and indirect ways they will then share with other people and touch other lives.
Well, that's great. I think it's, that just awareness that you can only go as far as, you can only take others as far as you've gone. I think that that's fantastic. And it's just good to hear somebody say that out loud. Okay, so if people want to find you, if people would like to be, if they're interested in doing a session, what's the best way to find you or get in contact with you?
So it's my website, untanglingself.com. And I have some information up there which I am slow to update, but I'm continuing to update. I offer a pay what you want introductory session. So if someone wants to reach out to me to set up a session to see what this kind of exploration looks like and feels like, what kind of promise it holds, they can do that. And otherwise, I'm most active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is now Theo, Nowtheo. And yeah, you can DM me there. And again, I will be slow to respond because digital communication can be messy for me. But yeah, I'll get back to you and help in any way I can.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, this has been really great. I appreciate you being open to this type of conversation. And so thank you. And goodbye.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all the interesting, wonderful questions.